Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. My guest this evening is Jeffrey St.Clair. And I hesitate because he was invited on before and I screwed up somewhere along the way, and we finally got organized and squared away, and here you are tonight guesting on the show.
I'm glad I'm here on the right day at the right
time. How are you feeling right now?
I'm feeling good.
Good.
How are you?
Are you nervous?
A little bit.
Not as much as I am. I'm always nervous. Good to come on. I've said this a number of times before the camera started rolling, because of what you've done with your life and your interests and your concerns are like mine, and you've done so much in your history of what you've written, and I'm just kind of dumbfounded to talk to you about stuff. But I've got a form that'll help guide me along the way, and I'll put away my awe of you and what you've done. Yeah. So, as you know, the first half of the show will be about who you are personally, so the viewers has a chance to get an idea of what's going on behind you as they learn about what you're doing in your life.
Sure.
Or other things that we might address. For your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals, and about whatever it is we have decided to talk about. And we'll be talking about Field Notes from a Failed Revolution. Field Notes from a Failed Revolution. That's a subtitle of Bernie and the Sandinistas. Let's get a picture of that here. This is your latest adventure in publishing, huh?
Yes, it is.
And about the author, Jeffrey St.Clair co-edits Counterpunch. His books include Whiteout, The CIA, Drugs, and the Press, with Alexander Coburn, of course.
To his friends.
Ben Brown, So Long It Looks Like Green to Me, Grand Theft Pentagon, Born Under a Bad Sky and Hopeless, Barack Obama and the Politics of Illusion with Joshua Frank, and He Lives in Oregon. Boy. So let's just go right at it here. And if I were to ask your best friend, who is Jeffrey, what would your best friend say? Jeffrey is what? Be your best friend.
Oh, my best friend?
Speak in the first person.
Yeah.
Pretend you're your best friend. Who is Jeffrey?
I'm
He
a husband, a father, a dog lover, nature lover, tree hugger, radical environmentalist. I have a wide range of interest, music lover.
Oh, man.
I think,
that's enough.
A kind of radical spirit, I guess.
Radical spirit. And when and where were you born? Were you born in Oregon?
No, I was born, like a lot of Oregonians, born elsewhere. I was born in God's country, as they call it, back in Indiana, Indianapolis.
And when was that?
1959.
59, okay. Why were you born?
Why was I born?
Why does everybody ask me the same question back? I got a trick question now and then.
Yeah, I don't know how the sort of karmic wheel, was spinning then.
So you were born because of karma? Why?
Some kind of karma.
Okay.
I think to have a sort of contrarian spirit to my parents, to challenge them and help them do problem solving for the next 18 years.
Yeah. I've asked this question so many times. I'm ahead of the game on you, and I boiled it down to two words that Mama gave me when I was very small. Be nice. That's why I was born. It covers everything.
Yeah.
Now you're going to say something to me and give me a new idea to try the next guest. Okay. Anything significant about your racial or cultural heritage worth mentioning?
Your
white bread?
Drop of Native American blood.
Okay.
You know, grew up in a very white suburb of a very white city.
Indianapolis.
Indianapolis. The core of Indianapolis, of course, is much more mixed. Indianapolis is a much more diverse city than Portland is. But I grew up in the white flight suburbs, I guess you would say. But was always drawn to the inner city. It's what I liked in sports. It's what I liked in music. You know, I was always drawn to, I guess, the other of Indianapolis, the forbidden zones.
Why is that?
Why?
Yeah.
It was attractive to me. It was energetic. It differentiated me from everyone else on the block. Let's put it that way.
I wonder who your associates were growing up. Never mind. You're very interesting, even for starters. Before we even get started, and religious preference. Did you ever have one?
I've mainly been in churches, you know, my life to look at the murals, at the architecture. I guess if I had any kind of religious awakening, it may have been in high school when I studied Buddhism through college. And
how long did you study Buddhism?
Well, I mean, a study I might put in quotation marks,
yes.
But did a lot of deep reading, a lot of meditation, and some studying. But, you know, from the age of maybe 16 through mid-20s. I mean, I've continued meditating and continued reading.
That was my next question. You're ahead of me.
Okay. So.
Yeah, there's something about a person's aura that there's a quality about them as we're talking and visiting. I sense something. I'm not sure what it is. But I was born and raised a Roman Catholic kid, an ultra boy and all that kind of stuff. But I had this kind of interest through the years. Of course, my education wasn't that sharp, being born and raised in New Orleans. But there are certain things about my upbringing that gave me that sort of a quality, because now and then I have a guy who is a real meditator or a Buddhist or an Eastern orientation, and after a few minutes you say to me, there's something about you, you look kind of Buddhist. And I always take that as a stroke. But you don't have a formal religion now, do you?
No. I would say, you know, philosophically, I'm more with the existentialist, I guess. You know, do your good works here, which is, you know, part of the Catholic social tradition as well, I think. Very drawn to the Catholic workers, you know, in particular, that whole tradition. But
what about the Pope nowadays? Do you think
I'm very impressed. I call him the hippie Pope, but you know, and I say that affectionately.
Of course.
And he's. I was dubious at first because he came from Argentina, and he was his rise through the clergy there was at the same time as the Dirty War in Argentina.
Yes, yes.
And you know, there appeared to be some less than savory affiliations that he had with the church at a time when thousands and thousands of people were being, quote, disappeared in Argentina. But I think he's the real deal. I've had a reappraisal of Pope Francis.
He's very impressive.
I think so.
I'm a recovering Catholic, so as I think I mentioned, I was an altar boy. How about your formal education? Say a few words about that.
I went to American University in Washington, D.C., studied history and English literature. And I avoided, going on and getting a master's and PhD. There was a lot of pressure to do that, but
in what?
I had my
doctorate.
Probably in literature.
And you earn your keep now by your writings and those kinds of things?
Been a professional, in quotation marks, writer, journalist for, I guess, 30 years, 35 years.
Do you travel much?
Less than I did, say, 10 years ago. I used to do on the road a lot, either promoting books, doing readings on campuses, speeches on campuses, doing, investigative reporting. But really, since the web has sort of changed journalism, as I'm sure you know, and it's tied me down in ways that I think are less than positive, but it's the way journalism has gone. So less time on the road and more time over the computer at home.
Mm-hmm. So what prompts you to write about the topics you write about? The books you write.
Yeah, I mean, the first book that we wrote with Alexander Coburn, my late great friend, was a history of the Central Intelligence Agency.
Oh, man.
And its association with the criminal element. I mean, it's a criminal organization itself, but particularly drug-running gangs. And what sparked that was the revelations of Gary Webb, a fantastic reporter also from Indianapolis. But at the time, in the 90s, he was working for the San Jose Mercury News. And he did a series of stories called Dark Alliance, which charted how the CIA, some of its Nicaraguan Contra figures, were importing cocaine into Los Angeles during the Nicaraguan War.
Iran-Contra.
And this flood of cocaine into LA coincided with the rise of the crack epidemic. Yes. And they were using that money in order to purchase weapons in the Contra War. Mm-hmm. And it was a very detailed, important story, just immaculately reported. And his career was just savaged by the mainstream press, by the Central Intelligence Agency, by what we might now call the deep state. Yes. This story was attacked and just, he was slandered, driven out of the journalism business, and ultimately ended up a few years later committing suicide. So Alex and I wanted to put that story into a broader context. In fact, that from the very beginnings of the, even the predecessor to the CIA, the OSS, had made alliances with people like Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky. And this is something that has continued throughout the entire history of the agency.
Are you going to talk about the deep state before the show is over?
Well, I mean, if you want to talk about the deep state.
I want to talk about what you want to talk about, of course.
But so that's, you know, that was the first book, and it wasn't something that we had originally planned to do. It sprang out of circumstances. You know, one of the next books was on the WTO protest in Seattle. It's called 5 Days That Shook the World, and that was based on my reporting up there, you know, on the streets, amid the pepper spray and the concussion grenades, and so yeah. I mean, you never know where the books are going to come from. You know, they're just
at the moment. That's what seems topical.
You know, you get a scent and you follow it, and you go to where it leads.
Yeah. Oh, you have a partner? Boyfriend, girlfriend? Or
I've got a wife.
I cover all the bases. Sometimes
I think she's called the general manager.
Yeah.
Kimberly. She's we met at in university in a D.H. Lawrence class. If you know D.H. Lawrence,
yes.
the great British novelist.
Yes.
And she's brilliant, and we have two beautiful kids who are now in their 30s. It seems hard to believe. She's a librarian at Portland State here.
All right. I didn't ask you the next question. What's your political persuasion? Are you a Trump supporter? Don't look at me in that tone of voice.
I guess I would be my tendency is kind of left-wing anarchism, I guess. Coburn used to describe himself as an anarcho-syndicalist. I think just because it had so many syllables to it, it confused people. But I guess that's, I mean, I'm mainly a writer, but my sympathies are to the far left, I guess. But the kind of left which is suspicious of government, because there is a left which is, I think, has a more adulatory view of the role that government plays, and I'm more on the anarchist side of that, I guess.
Okay, I'm listening. I'm doing my job now, but I'm listening because I I can learn more from you. I started in college in journalism and didn't last very long in that because I was too young and wild. And I kept changing majors and back to school. But anyhow, that's a distraction here. Memberships in political, social, or civic organizations, do you belong to any of those that are worth mentioning? I'm an ACLU member, and I'm a Bernie supporter.
Yeah,
and,
like the National Lawyers Guild.
Yeah, figures.
Yeah, I mean they're they're in there fighting the good fight.
Always.
I like radical environmental organizations. Like Earth First. Support them. I think that's going to be the battle.
How about Morris D's operation, Southern Poverty Law Center?
I'm a little bit more skeptical of Morris D's and those operations because, well, we've written a lot about Morris D's over the years. I think that he's had some very good people working for him. One of the best is a guy by the name of Stephen Bright, who's probably the best anti-death penalty litigator in the United States. But I think that Deese's operation, from my point of view, is I'm very suspicious of thought crimes. The idea that we legislate against the way people think, and I think that Deese's operation has been at the forefront of that. Although they've done a lot of good, very suspicious of of that aspect of it.
Okay. What do you think of the mainstream media today? I have a pretty good idea.
Well, I guess we'd have to, define what it is.
Yes. What is it?
I used to write for a magazine. It's now out of print, but it was called Lies of Our Times, or Loot, and it was just a magazine which critiqued stories in the New York Times. And so I think that, these publications are publications for the elites of the country. And they tell the story that benefits the elites. Obviously, Noam Chomsky has, written, the books on how to read the New York Times, and how to know how the news that you're getting. And they have excellent writers in the New York Times.
Yes.
And I read it every day. I wish I used to, subscribe to the Post and the Times. I read them both. Sure. But the news doesn't come at you straight in either of those publications, particularly now so that you have Jeff Bezos, the czar of Amazon. Yeah. Whole Foods and the rest of the world now has, publishes the Washington Post. So I think that, so they have an agenda which they conceal from you. I actually long preferred the Wall Street Journal, not the editorial page, which is raving mad.
Yes.
But their news, I thought, was much straighter. And there's a reason for that, because the people who subscribe to the Wall Street Journal, the business elites, need their news straight in order to make their decisions. So I always thought that, you were getting a more immediate, less filtered news from the Journal than you were getting from the New York Times, which may have had better writers. They wrote more elegant sentences, but there was a hidden agenda behind them. Now this is all kind of blown up now. The old mainstream media is literally, swimming for its life. The web has broken that all apart, and for better or worse. And they're really kind of running for their lives now.
I keep coming back to the deep state. I've done a little reading on that recently because it's relatively new to me. But a couple of things you're saying reminds me of what's really going on with the deep state, who's really running the show, so to speak. You want to talk about the deep state a little bit right now?
Well, sure. Please. I mean, we can.
Yeah, help me out here.
So
I got a big folder and I'm expanding it.
Yeah, well, I think the idea of the deep state has been around really since Eisenhower gave his famous speech on the military-industrial complex.
Yes.
The deep state's been around a lot longer than that, but I think it's not a club. You know, they don't have a card in their wallet that says, you know, honorary member of the deep state or
Like my
member of the
ACLU
deep
card.
state since, you know, 1963. It's not like that. And in fact, I think the deep state, there are deep states, you know, because obviously the Central Intelligence Agency is a very powerful part of the deep state.
Well, is there a bottom line deep state like the super rich and the ordinary citizenry?
Well, that's one. That's, you know, that's a way of, and I think class analysis is very important.
Yes.
And class analysis plays into the deep state because the deep state wants to preserve the status quo for the elites that run the country. And there are financial elites, and there are foreign policy elites, and there are, you know, the media elites. And often they're working in concert, but I don't think they're making these decisions the way a lot of conspiratorialists would say at the, you know, Bilderberg, you know, gatherings or at the Council on Foreign Relations.
Yeah.
It is that they're in sync because they're part of the same economic class and they have the same basic interest that they want to see defended.
How can I determine whether a person is bottom line a member of a deep state or the deep state? Is it the amount of wealth that they have beyond that which they need to live uncomfortably?
I think the Mexicans call that inexplicable enrichment, which I think is one of the great, we should have, if we're going to add something to the criminal code, and I think we add much, you know, there's too much in the criminal code.
I like
but
that.
We should add that, inexplicable enrichment. I think that is would be a good identifying trait of someone who, if they're not part of the deep state in terms of making decisions, the deep state functions as their
Way
Praetorian
in the
Guard.
Background, Praetorian Guard. The Trump regime, how are they in a deep state or the deep state, or is there going to be a collaboration between the Trump regime and the deep state such that there's no difference? That's when it's all over.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you listen to Trumplandia, essentially what they're saying is that the deep state is trying to take Trump down. That the CIA and the NSA and the FBI in the form of Comey and of course the elite liberal media are trying to take him down because he wants a rapprochement with the Russians, because of his views on NATO, because of his views on traditional American alliances, which were created by the deep state. I think that's a fallacious argument because Trump's Twitter feed are not the policies that the Trump administration are advancing.
Perhaps
It's almost a smokescreen for the policies that Trump is advancing, which are immiserating his supposed base of working class whites, which are advancing interventionist foreign policy in the Middle East, in Africa, in South America. We are now buzzing, you know, the Chinese. We're threatening war against North Korea. It's militarism on all fronts. And so...
there's a joker in this deck here.
Yes.
His personality disorder trumps. That's overruling and overriding and influencing so randomly and so crazily, illogically, such that we can't guess at what he's really about because it's all impulsive.
Yes, I think you're right about that.
Yeah.
I don't think that, aside from greed and self-glorification,
Which
that
he
Trump
needs.
has a political ideology in the way that we would have understood it from previous presidents or even political
Or
candidates.
historical figures, yeah.
Yeah. So that makes him very difficult to read. You can't put him in any kind of, you know, box or you know, mold that we've had from a politician.
What are we going to do about him?
Well,
We being at least America, what are you going to do about it?
yeah, I mean, he's our problem. We've unleashed him upon the world, right? So, you know, no, he has to be stopped and confronted. His policies need to be stopped and confronted. So the thing is that now look, you know, you're right. Trump is an impulsive figure, and you never know what he's going to tweet. But basically, the policies, we know what the policies are, and those are the most vicious, you know, neoconservative policies that you could possibly imagine. There is no constraint on them. That's the problem. He has no. You think back to George W. Bush, and at the time, you know, he was a kind of unimaginable figure to be running the country. But he looks much more rational in the rearview mirror, doesn't he?
Yes,
and the fact
yes.
is that the Bush administration did moderate its policies to an extent
Yeah.
when they overreached
Yeah.
for their own sustainability. Trump has no such, maybe you would call it a political superego.
Yeah.
There are no brakes on the machine, right?
Right.
He does. He
Right.
runs through every red light. So, and
That degree of pathology.
yeah. So, in a sense, this idea of the deep state moderating him, you know, is a kind of wish fulfillment, I think, for the left, which has been so impotent, you know, politically for so many years.
Yeah.
That they needed this kind of, in literature you would call it the deus ex machina ending, you know, where in the last act of a play, you know, order is finally restored out of the blue,
extinction.
inexplicably, right? But no, it's going to take a grassroots movement to rise up against Trumpism. And it has to be more than against just Trump, because if you remove Trump and you get Mike Pence, somebody I know very well from Indiana, I debated him in high school. Mike Pence is a seriously evil person, I think, who does have an ideology, and it's a vicious ideology, and he has the complete support of the Republicans who now control every sector of our government. Whereas Trump, I think the Republicans tolerate Trump because they want to use him in order to get through their destruction of our healthcare system, advance their tax cuts for the wealthy, and
They never get enough.
right. And so, you know, they think that, you know, Trump has some kind of populist appeal that those policies would never have out in the open.
Is he going to last this term, or is he going to last the first year of this four-year presidency?
I think that he's on his way out. I don't think he's going to be impeached. Only the Republicans can really remove him. You know, if he becomes an obstacle to their grand schemes, they're the only ones. You know, the Democrats are in no position to impeach him. They have no power.
What if he foments a revolution?
Well, that's a possibility. I think it's much more likely that he resigns and hands out a lot of pardons to his offspring and and himself, perhaps. That seems the more likely scenario. But
I get upset when you talk about his family and his daughter and his son-in-law and that whole immediate family. I get so angry I can't think anymore.
What is it that irritates you about this? That
Because
we have a
stuff
kind
that
of,
comes on every other day or so. There's some new thing that the current thing is this meeting about supposedly with this Russian lawyer discussing something about Hillary,
right.
And it just gets more bizarre.
Well, it's bizarre, but it's bizarre from the context of the way politics has been practiced. If you look at it from the way mob relations, you know, have been practiced, and don't forget that, you know, Donald, you know, grew up in the Bronx. His father, from, you know, his construction business was linked to the mob. His idol, You know, his mentor, Roy Cohn, the vicious New York lawyer, was a mob lawyer. And if you analyze Trump from that point of view, you want your family the closest to you. You want your family, your blood, making all of the really important and transgressive decisions for you, right? Because those are the last ones who are going to turn on you. And I think that it's very useful to look at Trump's organizational behavior from that point of view. He's not a traditional businessman. He's never been responsible to a board of directors or to shareholders. It's always been that inner circle, that inner sanctum of family and business partners who have been, and consiglieres who have been with you your entire career.
I think we're going to stop at this point in time and take a break because I think the government is going to change in this country when the revolution comes much sooner than people have thought. And there's a number of ways it can go, the revolution I'm thinking about, revolution against Trump and Trumpism. But where's it going to start, this revolution? Is it going to be the right wing that supports him? Oh, never mind. Let's take a break, Mr. E, because I'm getting myself all confused here. That, you know. Okay, looks like we're back. If you missed the opening of the show, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about whatever it is we've decided to talk about tonight. And we decided to talk about Field Notes for a Failed Revolution. I got a few questions based on that title of that show. And we want to talk about Jeffrey's latest book, Bernie and the Sandinistas, Field Notes from a Failed Revolution. Very good. Okay. Thank you. And I'm having a good time so far. So, what is Counterpunch? I get your stuff all the time, you know, because of the web. And talk about Counterpunch, what it's about. Okay.
Counterpunch is our investigative newsletter. Started out as a newsletter back in 1993.
That's a while, man.
Beginning of the Clinton administration. It was modeled on I.F. Stone's Weekly, if you remember that, the great I.F. Stone.
Lefty?
It was founded by Ken Silverstein, who's one of the great investigative journalists. And he had been an intern at The Nation magazine for Alexander Coburn, the top columnist at The Nation.
Yes.
And soon after starting Counterpunch, he asked Alex to come in on it with him, be the co-editor. And a couple months after that, Alex invited me on board to be their investigative reporter, and so I've been doing that ever since. Ken went on to greater glory with the LA Times and Harper's, written many books. And so after that, Alex and I were the co-editors up until Alex died 4 years ago, tragically. And
you're still carrying on.
the tradition. So, but we're now a magazine and we're a website, counterpunch.org. We get 12 million viewers every month, and we're firing away every day.
I love it. Ready for Bernie? Say a few words about Bernie Sanders. Oh, there's a lot to say about him. To say anything, there's so much about him that's interesting.
I mean, really, from the early days of Counterpunch, we've been reporting on Bernie Sanders.
All this time.
All this time. Alex knew him very well because Alex spent his summers in Vermont and watched Bernie's rise from the mayor of Burlington. Then he was elected member of Congress as an independent socialist from Vermont, as they always refer to it, and then into the Senate, and so it's an interesting career. To me, Sanders is still an enigma.
How so?
Well, why did Sanders, after laboring almost in isolation for so many years in the political system, and obviously he had a very, when he was mayor of Burlington, it was different. But once he got into the Congress, he wasn't a Democrat. He was sometimes part of their caucus and sometimes wasn't. And you don't sort of advance up the hierarchy of power.
And all the years he hung
as
in
an
there.
Independent socialist, right? And then even when he was elevated into the Senate, he was a contrarian and an outsider.
How did he get people to vote for him and keep him in the government?
Well, I think that he was also always very attuned to his constituency back in Vermont. And
that was rather unique.
And Vermont's a unique state.
Yes.
We've town halls, and everybody knows, their member of Congress and their senator and their mayor. Or it used to be that way. I'm sure Vermont's changing the way Oregon's changed. So he had that. He was really a grassroots politician. And in that sense, he didn't owe anybody. I think this is something to understand about
so
Bernie.
important.
If you're a Democrat, you owe a lot of people just by having that D next to your name on the ballot. If you're in Congress, you owe the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee and all of the funders that they've recruited to dump money into your campaign, and whether they're from the health insurance industry, whether they're from, the weapons making industry, you owe them. And when they call you, you have to answer the phone and you have to be obedient to them to a certain point. And Bernie really never had that. So he didn't know Citibank, he didn't know Wells Fargo, he didn't know, Goldman Sachs. And that was a liberating force. But it doesn't do you much good, as a politician in terms of pushing bills through Congress. That's, traditionally the way we would evaluate someone's political career. Well, how many bills have, got your name on them? But that wasn't what Bernie was doing. And then suddenly out of the blue, here he is leading this rebellion within a party that he's not a member of. And maybe that's the only way you could do it.
What would prevent him from assuming the leadership of another party and winning the presidency?
Well, that's one of the questions it's a psychological question, I think, that at least the way I pose it in the book, is what is it about Sanders that made him make the choice that he did, which was to run in the Democratic primary when he knew that the odds were stacked against him. In fact, that the entire primary process was rigged to ensure his defeat.
Yes.
And the elevation of someone who he saw clearly as the enemy at one point. Hillary is the standard bearer for neoliberal economics and aggressive, militarism in foreign policy. So why did he make that decision? And then why did he double down when Jill Stein, the leader of the Green Party, offered Bernie, he said, look, I will step aside and, we will nominate you as the candidate of the Green Party. And why did he decline that? Those are questions that I think I don't have a satisfactory answer to, but I think it's one of the great missed opportunities of the last generation of American politics, particularly when you look at the way the election turned out with Trump winning. He had literally had nothing to lose.
He didn't win. He assumed the presidency by default.
Well, I mean, I think he did win. Well, you can say that Hillary lost, and I think that's true.
Okay.
But I don't think we should engage in this kind of magical thinking that Trump didn't win the presidency. I mean, the way the system
that was
works,
for argument.
The way the system works, he did win, and the states that he won, he never should have won. He only won because the Democratic Party had abandoned its working class base in the industrial Midwest.
Who was the leader of the Democratic Party at that time? The woman.
Well, you had Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who was run out on the second day of the convention, I think.
Yeah.
And her place was taken by Donna Brazile, an old Clinton hack.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that Barack Obama has a lot of things that he needs to be thinking about as he writes his memoirs. But one that should be foremost in his mind is why he didn't just completely clean the DNC, the political operation of the Democratic Party, of all of the Clintons. And instead of doing that, he really let the Clinton operation continue to control the party. And I think that proved disastrous for his own eight years in office, and it certainly proved disastrous in the 2016 elections. And you look at those people are the reason we have Donald Trump right now, because they are just, I think, incompetent, greedy, and tied to a candidate who was doomed to lose.
Sandinistas. Who are the Sandinistas?
Well, the Sandinistas is a term that I coined early on for the young people who were flocking to Bernie in a kind of mystical pilgrimage, And I went to many Bernie rallies, and they were, as I described them in the book, I was quoting from an old Beatles song, that there was this magical feeling that you had. And let's face it, Bernie's not the most, charismatic speaker. When he's not Mario Cuomo or Jesse Jackson. I tend to think, I don't know if you remember Eugene McCarthy.
Oh yes.
Who had a similar, who was also an older politician who had the guts to challenge the war in Vietnam and LBJ. And the youth flocked to him in a similar way that the youth flocked to Bernie. And it was a kind of an odd pairing. But I think that the youth saw in both of them that they were kind of like Old Testament prophets, maybe, that they were speaking the truths that no one else dared to utter. And it didn't matter how old he was, and perhaps even being 74, which I think Bernie was or is, added a kind of gravitas and authenticity that has been lacking in American politics, maybe their entire lives.
Catch the corner of your eye there. That eye. Okay, it's all gone. Okay. But we can edit that out. Right. You're fine now.
Right.
So, I don't know what it is. I can guess at what it is about him because I need a hero and I need somebody who follows in the footsteps. I see myself as looking up to Jesus and Gandhi and Martin Luther King and even John Lewis. So I always looking for a hero for whatever reason. Prince Valiant was my favorite when I was a little kid.
Those were great comics.
So, and there's this longing for somebody like him to come in and manage to stay alive. Because I think if he were to achieve some degree of success, and he were close to being nominated or assuming the leadership of our country, then he would be taken out as.
Well, that's been the history of politics in America, hasn't it?
Yeah. But wait and
well,
see.
what was it that draw you? You know, I mean, I'm a journalist, so you know, and somebody who's trying to understand the Sanders appeal. When did you first become aware of Sanders as a political force?
When political issues were being considered, and the media was looking, and just the things about Bernie and how he seemed to be principled. That's the first word that comes to mind for me. The man is principled.
Okay.
That's the most important. Yep. And I'm an idealist, and I'm a do-gooder and a tree hugger and all those kinds of things. And he seems to have a lot of those tendencies. It seems like there's something in him genetically that is going to be fair and dedicated, committed to social justice. Those words mean something, not just nationally. I'm a globalist, I think. We have a responsibility as human beings or as keepers of Gaia, and it feels good.
Well, we have, as Americans, more of a responsibility than almost anyone else, since we've dominated the planet for the past, 50 years at least. So it is our responsibility. But Bernie, so then, is the incorruptible, as they used to say of Robespierre in the French
This is
Revolution.
really interesting here. Under that table over there, and we can edit this out, there's a device that you pull out so that the table won't collapse.
Oh, okay.
Underneath. Can you reach under there and get it? See it? My editor's going to go crazy.
I don't know. It seems pulled out to me.
All right.
I don't think it's going down.
Okay. We'll leave you a couple of pages. So that's my thought and feeling about Bernie, and I'm waiting to see what's going to happen. At the same time, I'm worried about what's going to happen. We're approaching another global extinction, and that seems rather dramatic, and the possibilities of the Union of Concerned Scientists clock is getting closer to midnight, all those kinds of considerations. And I like to think of myself as those kinds of things because of how I'm made up psychologically, or even spiritually, if I may, whatever that means. Then those are the things that are important to me in my day-to-day and moment-to-moment existence, and taking enough time to stop thinking and be more often, sort of like in the Buddhist sense of what I'm talking about. That's important for me. And my wife, who is not as far left or as liberal as I am, doesn't appreciate as much as I do that simple idea of experiencing those few moments when I'm in the meditative state for long enough. And I'm aware that time has passed from the time I entered that state and I'm back thinking again. Those are the moments that I cherish.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Well, I think that was the vibe that many people were getting when they attended Bernie rallies. You remember here the one in Portland. They were almost mystical events. Remember the bird landing on the lectern?
Yes.
Yeah. So there was a feeling of community, electricity, and the hope. Really, I mean, Obama, there was hope, but I think it was mainly we're going to get a black president, which is you cannot really underestimate the meaning of that.
And he
in the
wasn't the
US.
Clarence Thomas, so that'd be
Right.
That's a real black president, not an Oreo.
Yeah. But so that was there was a real electrical charge to those events, with Bernie. And it was, whether you were in, Portland, where you might expect it, or in Boise, Idaho, where you wouldn't. But it was the same. And, he was drawing 15,000 people, packing everywhere he went. And so that's profound. The question is, what happens now? Now that the press buses are gone, and now that we're facing maybe the most extreme political death machine that we've ever seen in this country. We're staring right down the gun barrels. What are we going to do? How are we going to re-energize that revolution that we talked about when it's not about an election, when it's about our lives? That's the real question.
I'm always losing the connection, this thought that I had a moment ago when you were speaking. And when Lyndon Johnson said, "And we shall overcome," during that speech, remember?
Yeah, I remember.
And that just did something, like electricity. That's the kind of thing I think went on at these Bernie rallies. Occasionally, he said the right thing, and everything came together, and the bird came in.
Right.
Those magical moments.
Sure.
You can't recreate those.
No, you can't. You can't recreate them. But you have to use them for what they are.
Yeah.
That has to set you off the launch pad. You can't just go, back home. I mean, I think we look at these sort of signal points in American history. I think Katrina is one of them.
Yes.
Why wasn't there a revolution after Katrina? When you had the greatest city in America, I think, New Orleans, essentially destroyed.
Yeah.
And the government was passive throughout the death of 2/3 of this great city. Why wasn't there a revolution then? If a revolution doesn't happen then, what's it going to take?
Because the administration at that time was so successful in nipping in the bud any possibility of a leader stepping up to assume position of leadership.
Yep.
And to lead them. Never mind, I'm going to try to say. All right. Failed revolution. So the revolution failed, huh?
I think that it was...
And what is the revolution that failed?
Well, I think that it may not have been the revolution that Bernie was leading, but it was the revolution which many of his followers were looking for, and perhaps even capable of instigating.
Without a leader? I'm challenging you.
I think that it would have been possible without a leader. I mean, you look at Occupy Wall Street, which was a leaderless rebellion that I was skeptical of, beforehand, for precisely that reason. Where are your leaders? How can you plot a revolution through consensus, out on the courthouse steps? That's not the way Lenin did it.
No.
That's not the way Che and Fidel did it.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. But it sprung up in cities all across the country, not just in Berkeley, yes, San Francisco, yes, New York, and Portland. It was in Phoenix. It was in, Colorado Springs.
Yeah.
So, and I think that when we understand the Bernie phenomenon, you can't understand Bernie without understanding what happened during Occupy Wall Street. And you can't understand Occupy Wall Street without the WTO. And I think you can't understand the WTO without what was happening in the world at the time. And I think back to a revolution which came out of nowhere, and that was the Zapatista revolution, yes, in Chiapas, mm-hmm, where they emerged from the Lacandan jungle and said, "We're here."
For how many years did that go on?
Well, they were, 10 years in the jungle down there before they stood forth and said, "We're here, and we're not going to take it anymore." And so those are the signs of hope, that There's something festering. There are these movements that are cracking through, the concrete that's been poured over them.
And we're just getting started. We're going to have to stop in another minute or two. So why don't you take the next 30 seconds or a minute or so to talk to the viewers, to that camera over there, about anything else that's on your mind now, whatever you want to say about anything.
Well, I think that's our challenge, is to recapture the energy that we had during the Bernie campaign, and magnify it. We know who the demon is that's sitting on the throne. And if that can't get your juices flowing, then nothing can. But I feel it. I think that a change is coming. Change gonna come, as Sam Cooke said.
I was trying to think of that. What goes with that?
Change gonna come.
Well, thanks again for coming on.
It's my pleasure.
And really enjoyed visiting with you. And public service announcements, we got time for one or two of those. I always want you to put up a sign that talks about the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. Go to that website and learn more about the ACLU. Without the ACLU, our civil liberties would be further down the tubes than they are. And we got to end corporate personhood. We got to say to each other, corporations are not persons, and don't let them convince you of that. And money is not speech.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. All right. Thanks for watching. Oh, I'm so glad you watched. I sure enjoyed my guest this evening, Mr. St.Clair. And we'll see you next time. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable to you too. Not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Thanks again. Good night.